And so, Walter, I wanted to introduce you to our folk here in Maine in Wabanaki land, the people of the dawn, as Wabanaki means. And so Walter Lindstone, I hope I'm pronouncing it right.
Yeah, Lindstone. Yeah.
Lindstone, okay. Walter works with a dear friend of mine, Rennie Linklater, at the Center for Addictions and Mental Health in Toronto. And um, Walter and I began talking about how to deal with people who insists on a certain level of evidence that we might not have in order to implement programs. And and he's been looking into research on this topic, and we thought we would talk about that today. And Walter, I don't remember which First Nation you come
Yeah.
from. I thought you could share that and
Sure.
yeah. So over to
Bonjour. Nishkabe was the Kishnakas for Prashina Dodem, Bawating Doji Nishnabe and Tao. So in my Anishinaabe language, I just introduced my spirit name, which is your grandmother's helper. And I am from Batchewana First Nation, which is Sault Ste. Marie area. I reside here in Toronto. And I try to make it back home as much as I can. I have a lot of family that still live back home, and I have some family here in Toronto as well. So I'm raising my children here and trying to answer some of these tricky questions.
very good.
Yeah,
Very good. And I should also acknowledge that I'm speaking on the unceded territory of the Penobscot Nation, and to acknowledge their elders past, present, and future. And so, um, so this is, to me, this is a really important topic because I think that the randomized control trial is a completely colonial methodology. And and I've been thinking about that since we last talked, and I want to invite you to interrupt me as often as possible because no one wants to hear what I say because I've said it so often, and they really want to hear what you want to say or have to say because they haven't heard anything from you.
sure.
But I think about the idea. First off, the philosophical notion that anything is random or can be randomized. And then second, the notion that you can control the world or can control variables. And third, um, the notion that um, the average should rule the individual. And that also seems completely wrong to me. So I know you've been thinking about this too, Walter. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, yeah. I think after our last conversation, I've been doing a lot of thinking too. But over the last 2 months, I was assigned from Rennie Linklater. She's my supervisor at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. My position there is actually called implementation specialist, which which is interesting in itself, the title, because it actually has been changed from what is known in the Western system of CAMH in the provincial system support program. They're actually called implementation scientists. So with Shkabi Makwa, we're actually known as specialists because we have that two-eyed seeing, right? And that is my education and my background. Um, I think, I started out as an Indigenous centered social worker and I was trained as such with the two eyed seeing approach. And when you mention two eyed seeing and you mention Indigenous centered, what happens is it's confusing for Western practitioners because they often question, well, where does your heart lie? Where does your mind sit? And I talk to them about the paradigms, the differences in an Indigenous paradigm and a Western paradigm, and how science that paradigm and that Western scientific lens has been based on those ancestors who have studied and done that research and created this idea of randomized control trials. Or there's so many different types of research, but from that quantitative perspective. And I think about it a lot, and I think about our Indigenous ways of knowing, seeing, and doing, what it means to be Indigenous centered as a practitioner, and putting that, I guess, my epistemology, my axology, my etiology, putting all these things forward first and saying this is where I come from. So I had to work hard at understanding my identity of being an Anishinaabe and looking to my teachers and asking them for their guidance and direction and their advice, because this is who my people provide me that direction on how not only am I to live my life, but how our ancestors lived. And of course, even with the Penobscot, many other nations across Turtle Island, we have very similar teachings. And I've been learning from many different professors about this idea of finding our own ways to do research and also finding our own ways to work with the scientific world and using that two-eyed seeing approach. So Rennie Linklater asked me to conduct an evidence brief. And at CAMH, in my role, part of my role is to do write-ups on these types of things. And they're brief, they're like, maybe a few pages. Try to do it within, 6-7 pages. The challenge I've had is, I asked the librarian at CAMH to do some research for me, to do a literature scan, see what's out there pertaining to specifically research with traditional healers in practice on human beings. And nothing came up. She can't find very much. She did give me about 112 different articles on things that are discussing research, discussing land-based healing, discussing traditional healers incorporated into programs and services, etc. Great write-ups, great research being done. But for example, I worked at Anishinaabe Health in downtown Toronto, and I've worked directly with healers who they actually do a different type of work pertaining to what the Western scientific world would view doctoring or healing with patients, with clients, with community members. And so witnessing that really puts me in a frame of mind of listening to Rennie asking me to write this evidence, and I can't find the evidence. I can find it in my heart, I can find it in my spirit name, and I can find it through my ancestral being and the Anishinaabe ways. I can find it through other ancestral beings and nations across Turtle Island. I can see examples of that through sun dancing, through sweat lodge, through shaking tent, dark lodge ceremonies, tie-up ceremonies. I'm part of many different societies. I've got to witness many different types of traditional healing methods from many different traditional healers. And miraculous things have happened and come of that. But yet, no scientific studies on it specifically on how it happened or how it worked. And that's the crux. And you and I had a discussion, I think, last week about this significant challenge, is that a lot of traditional healers don't really want to be researched and studied to expose how they do things spiritually, how you define spirituality, whether or not that needs to be written down. And that's a real challenge, because the idea behind randomized control trials also has this premise that they need to know how you did it, because we want to be able to replicate it. I need to be able to take this across the world and show other scientists, and we need to be able to try it out ourselves to see if we can do the same thing. Because if you've discovered how to heal cancer, if you've discovered how to heal, certain types of brain injuries, dementia, if you're using certain types of medicines or doing certain types of healing practices that become very highly effective, then they want to know how to replicate it, how to, monetize it, and create this system of keeping it going. And I think that's valid. There isn't anything wrong with that, but there is a challenge right now we're having with getting traditional healers to want to do that. So yeah, that's the crux of the whole piece that I'm having challenges with right now.
And I think I'm recalling there was an elder that I took. I took him to a conference to be on a panel, and there was a nurse in the audience who asked him how he would treat arthritis. And he said, I don't know her. Why don't you bring her around to the house tomorrow and I'll get to know her and I'll tell you how I might work with her. And clearly, he knew what she was asking, but he was, with his tongue in cheek, making the point that he didn't accept her diagnostic system. That that the fact that she had arthritis didn't mean anything to him because it didn't tell him what was wrong fundamentally from his worldview. And I
Yeah.
always think of that as a great example of the mismatch of worldviews. And this notion of scalability and replicability. I mean, of course, you can't replicate spiritual healing because you can't control the spirits. I mean, you
No,
can't, you can't order them around,
no,
or they can order you around, I suppose.
yeah, yeah. But the other piece is you have to believe in spirituality. So that's another interesting concept. When you talk to traditional healers or you ask them about what that means to them, it's very abstract. Like to explain it in English and English language, and to explain it in scientific terms, that's part of what my job is actually at CAMH, is I'm an Indigenous knowledge broker. So what I do is I translate for Western scientific people what our Indigenous ways actually do. How is it parallel to the science? So I'll take words, I'll take language, I'll take a scientific lens or approach or method, and then what I'll do is I'll break it down and try to explain it as best I can. I use analogies, I use metaphors, I use strange examples, phenomenons. I think I mentioned to you, I talked to you about, maybe I didn't get to mention this, but um, there's a master in Japan that did Japanese water studies. Masamoto, Master Masamoto, I believe his name is, and it's very fascinating because he looked at under a high-powered microscope. He looked at the crystal of water, and then he did randomized control trials on different lake waters around Japan, and he did different things to these waters. He played classical music to some. He spoke softly and kindly to some. And each time he did that, he would take a high-powered microscope and take a picture of the crystal. And some of these waters, he actually played rap music to some of them. He played some, like, he yelled and said some horrific things to some of the waters, profanities. And he showed pictures, and the differences in the crystal were incredible. They look like, so the ones that he played beautiful music to, or the ones that he actually spoke softly or kindly to, were beautiful snowflake crystal, very, very pristine. Um, miraculous in its design, like incredible. Like you could see the Great Spirit in it fully. The other crystals that he spoke to negatively or played violent music to, etc., they were hugely distorted. Hugely distorted. The crystals were like all like sharp edge, jagged, pointy, not symmetrical at all. And it was fascinating, right, to watch the study, and it made me think about how much our human bodies have water, the percentage, and how maybe through prayer and through our Indigenous ways of knowing, seeing, and doing, and our stories, our songs, our dances, our language, this is the design on how we change our crystal, right, and becoming a higher vibration, right, and that higher vibration and that idea. When I talk to traditional healers, they all understand in various ways, shapes, or forms. The way they explain it is that there are many different ways to heal, and prayer is often what I see incorporated into the method. And there are often some tools that they have that they'll also use. So they've been given different ceremonies and different rites, rites, through earning them, through their own fasting, through their own sun dancing, through their own teachings from their teachers or their families, even family medicines they practice too. Is they use these tools along with their prayer to provide a context to be able to manipulate something within the human being. And they often speak about this human being as having four components to themselves: the spiritual, the mental, the emotional, and the physical. Now, these four aspects of being, they can go on forever about talking about each of these categories, like talking about the connection all the way to from rites of different passages pertaining to your stages of life, of your age. Um, for Anishinaabe, the number four is very sacred. And number four comes in many things in creation, right? The four different colors of human beings, that comes from the creation story for the Anishinaabe, the red, white, black, and yellow. And when you even listen to the creation story and you go back that far about the beginning of where we came from as human beings, it starts to build upon this medicine wheel, this idea that we are come from creation and we're a part of creation. And that's why we call Mother Earth our mother, because those medicines and those things that we acquire from her help us to continue to live our lives. The animals being our first family, that's in our stories as well. And those animals offering themselves to sacrifice themselves to provide us sustenance, provide us the fur to wear to keep us warm in the winters, to use their leathers, to eat their meat. These are all very sacred traditions and pieces pertaining to how our ancestors lived on this earth. So when you talk to traditional healers, they talk about land-based healing because they're talking about how our ancestors have always lived. Not just our ancestors, all the ancestors of all of humans of the earth. The red people, the white people, the black people, the yellow people, all these people all had the same story. So this idea of promoting traditional healing and understanding it from an evidence-based perspective is difficult because you talked about something interesting pertaining to replicating. I worked with a traditional healer where one client comes in and he asks the traditional healer for healing and understanding of his diabetes and wants to be cured from that, and presents tobacco, prays on the tobacco, presents tobacco to the traditional healer. The traditional healer puts the tobacco in his sacred pipe. He does a ceremony, asks me to drum as his helper, So I'm singing my songs to the spirit world and helping the healer to um, conjure or find that spiritual answer for this individual while the healer smokes his pipe to receive that information. And the healer can receive it in many different ways. You don't know how it's going to come, when it's going to come, where it's going to come from. They'll mention their spirit helpers are going to provide that information, their connection to the Great Spirit, their own spirit, their spirit name. So they're smoking this sacred pipe and smoking this medicine that's been preyed upon. And drumming, and I'm meditating and I'm thinking about praying as well, that the answers can come very easily for this healer and to help this community member. The healer comes out of his visioning, finds some information, and starts to share that with the client, saying, you are going to get XYZ. You need to find these medicines, or we have some here. Walter, can you go get those medicines, please? Put them together. I got to show him how he needs to prepare these medicines, how he needs to drink it, and then how he can pray to those medicines and ask for that healing to help him with his diabetes. So at the same time, I'm recording all this to put it in the computer, right? I'm practicing two-eyed seeing. You got to chart it. And the client goes off on their way, takes the medicine, and we'll see you next month. Next client comes in, same question. I have diabetes. Can you help me with this? Same process, exactly. Tobacco, prayed, put it in the pipe. I drum and sing my song, and the healer does what the healer does to get that information. Comes back and has a whole different prescription of medicine. Different, completely different. I'm sitting there confused in my Western mind saying, wait a minute, aren't you supposed to give the same medicine all the time to treat the same illness? And it's not the case. I learned very quickly that never happens. Every individual is unique. Their spirit is unique. Their DNA and their signature is unique. Their epigenetics, their ancestors, all of these pieces come into play during that session. And every spiritual helper and all those guides and things that the healers is looking towards to help this individual never is the same. Never is the same. It's incredible. It's just incredible to me. And I think that's the beauty for me, to be able to sit there in Shkabe in our language, that means helper, to be a helper, an apprentice to a healer, and to witness that and watch that, the beauty. It's like a plant growing, a flower growing. It has its own unique signature. And I don't know how to write this. I honestly am dumbfounded. I'm trying to do the best I can, but part of me was saying I need to meet with other people who have knowledge, who have expertise more than I. That definitely Rennie said to me, well, I could try to set up a meeting with you with Lewis. And I'm like, yeah, that'd be great. I read his books. He's come to CAMH. He's shared with us some of his spiritual knowledge on different ways that he has helped people in his life. And for me, I was curious to find out if through your work, have you found that when a person witnesses or comes back to you at the next session and says that really worked well, that helped me, is there times or moments where you have also felt like I was only a conduit? Like, I often hear healers say, I was only a conduit. I don't know, something miraculous happened. I've seen it before, but I'm saying I'm not surprised, but I don't really have that full answer as to how it happened.
Totally. I mean, that's been totally my experience, is that, you know, I feel like when something wonderful happens, you know, I don't know why it happened. I mean, and I can't predict necessarily when it's going to happen. Um, I do think, that there's some common elements that I find, like the stronger the person's faith, maybe the easier it is, and it seems like people have to make some offering. They have to give something of themselves. They have to be willing to do something and not just be passive. But but I've seen people, it sounds like, let me let the dog out. Hold
Or
that
no
dog.
problem.
Hey,
No
let the dog
problem.
out. Because he's gonna rev up. All right, all right, all right, all right. Go, go, go. Anyway, what I was gonna say is that I've seen people who you would think they have all the necessary ingredients for healing, and they don't heal. And I've always, well, I was always taught that it's above our pay grade, you know, that sort of thing. It's like, we're hollow bones. We ask, we do what we're told. We try to live in a good way, and the rest is outside of our control. And I think that really disturbs biomedical practitioners, that notion of not having control. Um, and that things can happen that are not predictable or replicatable. Because in their belief, if you can't replicate it, it's not real. And in our belief, well, of course you can't replicate it because no two people are the same. And so, and it's, that healing is context dependent, it and relational, and we're all at a different point in the spider web. And so we just, you know, where I stand in the web is always different from where you stand. So who can say it, it's got to be different?
Right.
And I have seen some movement toward this in conventional medicine, this notion of individualized medicine, and this um, rebellion. Others besides us are rebelling against the randomized controlled trial as being the holy grail. There's a group at Tufts University that talks about how it's the tyranny of the mean, and that the people who are farthest from the mean control the mean, and the people who are closest to the mean have very little influence on it. And so they argue that if you use the results of randomized controlled trials, you overtreat 80% of the people because only 20% needed the treatment. And that and that we have to be more discerning.
Yeah. Yeah. I I think you and I did discuss a little bit last week about our you know, the placebo as well. Like even there's been with psychiatry and medication, there's been placebo studies where it's unexplainable how the placebo is actually doing the same thing as the medication. And then they don't know, they don't have an answer for it. So that's the same thing with why I believe randomized control trials wouldn't work with doing this type of research with Indigenous healers. I believe that it's never been done, but I could imagine if you did try, or if you found a healer that would be willing and patience, and you got through the research ethics part, that would be another difficult one. I sat on the ethics review board with the University of Toronto. Man, that was incredible process, incredible process. But I think if you could do it and try, I I when I started my PhD, I was all gung ho about researching, doing my work with the sweat lodge at CAMH. They built a sweat lodge there. I'm a sweat lodge conductor and a pipe carrier, and I was trying to figure out a way to show, um, through not random, well, I considered randomized control trials, but it would be not on specifically work with individuals inside the sweat lodge. It would be a test to look at, what the outcomes were pre and post pertaining to their experiences of the sweat lodge. But then I met with scientists about it, and they started talking to me about it, and they started saying things like, well, are you going to be able to have the same healer and do the exact same sweat lodge and the same songs being sung? And are you going to use the same amount of grandfathers and grandmother stones? And all these things started coming up where I was like, it's going to be impossible to do. So I 1 second. So yeah, I don't know how I could have done it. And I veered away from it entirely, because we have 3 sweat lodges in Toronto, period. There's 3 organizations that have sweat lodges in Toronto. And I thought about doing research on all 3, but I can't ever get each sweat lodge to be the same, to have the same healer, to do the same type of treatment with clients. It would have been very difficult to do. So um, I was discouraged. And but I do think you could look at outcomes. Now, there is a training I just took last week called the Native Wellness Assessment through the Thunderbird Partnership Foundation. And this is a very interesting assessment on wellness for Native peoples. Um, it could be used as an evaluation tool, or it could be used as a tool to do scientific research with traditional healers. It's about 100 questions, and they're very interesting questions. I think the questions are of value, and it is actually a scientific validated research study that the tool has been validated. So um, it could be something, if you haven't heard of, maybe something you do a little research on. It was an interesting training I took, and I've seen a lot of value in that tool.
Yeah. I think we have to overthrow that notion that it has to be exactly the same to be scientific. And I, I think we just have to have the courage to stand up and say, we don't agree with you, and we don't agree with the philosophical foundations from which you're working, and we don't agree with your way of knowing being superior in this area, you know, and if if I wanted to compare 2 drugs, then a randomized controlled trial might be the best way to do it. But we're not comparing 2 drugs. We're looking at a whole system of healing and wondering, what happens. And for me, I think it's more valid to do life, sort of life history work, in the sense of looking at people's continuum. And if you do that, you you can see pretty clearly that when you enter into a certain lifestyle that includes the lodge and the ceremonies, that for many people their lives improve and their health improves. And and I think one can collect data on that, and to say this is, when you enter into this philosophy, people tend to be healthier. And you can't put a gun to someone and say you have to enter into this philosophy. We've randomized you to entering into this philosophy. It's just not good. You
No,
can't do that.
no. Well,
But
especially with our people, no, you can't for sure.
no, no, no.
they'll feel very violated. That's the challenge with research too. I mean, in Canada here, we have tri-council policy, two statements, and it's quite a lengthy document to protect how you approach and do research with Indigenous peoples. And you know, even at CAMH, when we do quasi research, so we do valuations and reports and different things on different communities, and you know, you're still doing research. You're still looking into, asking questions. And when you look at the Tri-Council Policy 2 statement, it says, well, did you do this first? Did you check into that? Did you look at OCAP principles, of ownership and control and access and possession of the data? And we don't. We say that we do. We say that we're going to be safe and we're going to protect the people. But that idea of protection too. I mean, when I was working at U of T, and I was sitting on the ethics review board. If you really critically looked at those applications when they were doing some research on Indigenous peoples, if you really wanted to bog them down and shut them down, there would be no research done, honestly. So there were times where I had to say, okay, well, maybe they could just change this wording or do this instead, or hire an elder, hire a consultant that's Indigenous to help them through this, help them fumble through it, and keep them safe as possible. It's never going to be 100%. The same with doing, research or doing any type of randomized control trials, or doing research with Indigenous peoples. You have to be safe. You have to protect the clients, protect the patients, and consult. You have to consult the community. I work at CAMH, and I do Indigenous evaluation frameworks with some of our projects. It's cumbersome, it's lengthy, takes a lot of time, and you don't have the money or the capacity or the time to be able to do that. So I have to cut them short all the time. Same with research projects. There's a professor at Wilfrid Laurier University where I finished my master's of social work. He was one of my professors named Gus Hill. He did his thesis on traditional healing, and it's a phenomenal thesis. It took him 10 years, because what he taught us in the class about his thesis was that he had to take the time to sit with the elders and healers and wait for them to share. And that was an Indigenous approach to, him doing his research project, was that he needed to allow that time. And a lot of them, it was because of mistrust. He wanted to make sure that he could build the trust and the rapport before, and they were testing him too, right? Making sure that I'm not just going to give you this information. You need to really have patience, earn this, and I need to know that you're going to keep it safe, keep me protected, and do this right. So it's not an easy road, I think, what we're trying to attempt. But I think me meeting with you, having these discussions, having these recordings, I highly believe it's a time for us to start discussing this. I have another gentleman I'm bringing in on this, named Joseph Pitawanakwat. Wonderful man, highly scientific, but also very traditional. He said there are plenty of research, scientific research, randomized control trials with traditional healers and traditional medicine specifically, so plant medicines. There are certain plant medicines you can do it with if you keep that. So he's been fascinated. I've been meeting with him and talking with him, and I'm also going to create some podcasts with him. And I think the more we do this, the more we're moving in the vein of what you're speaking to, on us starting to stand our own ground and start to take a position and say, we're not going to be able to do it that way. We're going to have to start developing our own way to do this research. And we want to be heard. we need to be heard. It's important to validate our own ways. Now, my other PhD research was on actually uh, creating new schools of thought pertaining to how we are delivering education, and how we are delivering pedagogy or andragogy with practicum placements. So, for example, in social work, you get trained as an Indigenous centered social worker at these Indigenous fields of studies. There's quite a few sprouting up now here in Canada. Then you will get placed in a Western scientific field, and they have no idea what you're talking about. You're like, hey, can I put out my bundle here? They're like, well, we're delivering modules on this evidence-based CBT method during the circle. So we don't know how that bundle's going to fit into that. And I'm like, oh, well, that's how I was trained. I was told to put the sacred bundle in the middle. We're going to burn some smudge and we're going to pass the feather and we're going to start to talk and we're going to allow the people to share. And, you know, the circles I've ran with people, with Indigenous people, it's been phenomenal, the sharing. The You can see the spirit session after session. These people start to find their voice, and it's not them. They swear, they're like, I don't know what happened to me. They say, I just started talking, and I'm holding the feather, the sacred eagle feather, and I found something, and I started sharing, and something lit up inside of them. And to me, that is the great spirit and the power of that circle. There's an energy that's shared in that circle. So when you have your sacred bundle there, when you have smudge, tobacco, you start with prayer, you sing a song, you have that eagle feather there, and you begin to share, um, in that way, that andragogy, that pedagogy. Beautiful things come from it. Beautiful healing comes from that. And we were taught that in my BSW, from a Maliseet professor. He actually wrote out how to do a traditional healing circle, how to conduct one. And that was phenomenal for me because it gave me some context and some writing to be able to share in my reports, my research, sharing with my managers and my directors. This is who I am. I'm an Indigenous centered social worker. Here's some literature to show you what I'm doing to help you understand, right? So, yeah, I think there is ways to do this. There is ways to share this information and to help the Western education system, help Western science understand the need for us to validate ourselves and validate us in our own way.
Well, you know, I mean, before the invention of the randomized control trial, science was about observation and and sometimes doing something and observing what happened. And I think uh, the scientists you talked about from Japan, I mean, that's really what he was doing. He did things and he observed what happened. And I think we do the same thing. We do ceremonies, we do, um, we give medicines, and we observe to see what happens. And and we don't keep doing things that don't work. And I think that's really the humorous thing to me about the biomedical people that question all of this is that, guys, if it didn't work, it wouldn't have been going on for 2,000 years.
Yeah.
People abandon things that don't work. So, and I think about Rennie's book, Decolonizing Trauma, and and I was really moved by the stories in that book. And I think that that these collections of stories are valid data that that and I think, we also have to collect stories about the times that it didn't work, and not just the times that it did work. There's but that narrative research has a place, and it has a power, and and it can be equally valid to randomized controlled trials. And that's really where we have to stand our ground and to say, look, we have evidence. We just we just have different philosophy of the world from you, and we don't agree with that your evidence is the best.
Yeah.
We think ours is better.
Yeah. Well, you know what is and what's wrong with that? What's wrong with what if I do have something that is actually better than, an intervention, a scientific intervention that is being offered? What if I have something that is as powerful or as effective as CBT or DBT? Um, DBT is a mixed mash of many different, especially Eastern, religions. They've taken a lot of those different things. You see it all over the place now. People are using smudge and medicine more. It's becoming very popularized. So I think sweat lodges have been done all around the world. Many different nations have done those. Um, but the thing is that um, I wrote a paper in my epistemology class at the University of Toronto in my PhD work, and the paper I wrote was actually on I was I was arguing whether or not we should do what is similar to Chinese medicine and regulate it. I was arguing that it could be done. We could do it the same way as Chinese. And actually, just recently, I heard they've started to deregulate a lot of Chinese medicine because it opens up the doorway to allowing more progressive practices in many different ways. Whereas regulating it as such, it started to create a lot more silos. But I do think it's possible to research the medicines. We can very easily find out. There's even websites you can download databases on showing the chemical properties of the medicines and how they work, what they do. I'll share a funny story with you. So a traditional healer came from, he was Cree from Northern Ontario, came into Toronto. He um, he wanted to go and visit Toronto and see Toronto. So I took him around town and I wanted to show him Spadina Avenue in Chinatown. There's many different traditional Chinese medicinal places that you can go in and get treatment. You walk in and you just say, "Oh, I'm feeling ill. This is happening. That's happening." They'll even have a list on the door of all the different ailments you could possibly be having and what they can treat. They can treat it, they say. So I bring this healer into this Chinese medicinal place that does acupuncture, and they do a lot of different things. On the wall, they have big glass jars. There's maybe 100 of them on the wall. And in these jars, there's medicines, mushrooms, fungus, strange looking things, all kinds of things, roots, ground powders, many different things. And we watch a client come from out from the back. He just gets his prescription. He just seen a practitioner, brings it to the counter. The person behind the counter goes and grabs 5 jars off the wall, has a cheesecloth right there on the counter, gathers the different types of medicines as per the prescription, puts it in the cheesecloth. They tie it up for the person, put it in a brown paper bag, and say, "There you go. Go home, boil it, drink it, and that'll help you with whatever the practitioner's seen. Help you with your ailment." So, me and the traditional healer, what we were curious though was we were asking the practitioners there if they pray to the medicine or where do they get the medicine? Did they pray when they pick the medicine or do they know where the medicine even comes from? And I asked Joseph Petawarnaquat this too, and he almost was hesitant to talk to me about it because there is a spiritual power in medicine and there is a spiritual power in prayer in praying to something and act it almost like it activates a different kind of essence in that medicine or in that pipe or in your hand, you're holding tobacco. My healers, my elders were telling me to hold it in my left hand as an extension of my heart, right? Um, and that comes from old stories, or it comes from somebody sharing with them that wisdom. And this idea of activating a medicine or praying. Another healer told me that you put this special powder in this hot water, this special medicine. It has to form in a certain way around the rim of the cup for it to work. It's a heart medicine. It's called Absichigan. And the healer is the one that knows how to do that, pending their prayers. And if it doesn't formulate a certain way around the rim of that cup, it's not going to work. And you hear stories like that, right? So me and this healer in this Chinese shop, and they shoot us out. They kicked us out because they just kept going, no, we don't know, leave. And we were just dumbfounded. So we went to another place and we did the same thing. We started asking questions about these gigantic pieces of fungus they had just sitting in boxes around their store. And we were asking them what they do with them. What is it for? Because it's all in Chinese, right? We can't read it. We were just wanting to know a little bit of their story and their history, and they were reluctant to share. Maybe because they thought we were just some crazy guys. Maybe we were trying to expose something naughty they shouldn't be doing and how they acquired these gigantic mushrooms. I don't know. But finally, one Chinese practitioner started talking to us and told us that ginseng, there was ginseng roots in their cabinet. And these ginseng roots all had different prices. Some were like ridiculously priced just for a little root, like hundreds of dollars. And we found out that the price varies based on where that root came from. So if this particular root that was worth like $400 or $500 was picked in a very sacred place on a mountain, and it's so rare for it to grow there, but it has a high spiritual energy, he told us. It's highly impactful. Do you believe that? Do you believe I'm going to pay $500 for this root and that it has more power than this $20 root he has on the bottom of his cabinet that just got grown on a farm somewhere here in Ontario? So it's fascinating. It's beautiful. But these are all questions that I think are fair. They're things that we do need to talk about. And it's exposing spirituality. It's saying that we do believe it's real. It may not be something we can fully explain, but we don't have to. Like you said earlier, we know that it works. This isn't something that we continue to practice if we knew it was hurting our people or it wasn't going to work. So just like I shared with you last week, my traditional healers and elders that taught me exposed me to something. They offered me my identity. Because my mother was in residential school, she never learned the traditions. She never practiced it. She was brought up through the church. The church it wasn't something I resonated with. So when the elders came to my community when I was about 12 years old, Elder Vern Harper, he came and he shared a sweat lodge with us. He's a coyote. He's a backwards clown. He would share that openly and freely and laugh with us young kids. He'd bring us in the sweat lodge and we'd have a good time. And that was the first time I was ever exposed to culture. And from there, it snowballed. And of course, I had trust issues. Of course, I was uncertain, because of my upbringing, my own trauma. But as I began to trust, and as I began to listen, and as I began to see, and as I began to apprentice, that's when my life changed. The dreams started to come, just as they told me they would. And how can I not believe that there's something bigger to this world? There was something more. My identity, my ancestors, the spirit that they're calling is present and it's real and it's flowing through me and it's helping me. It's helping me to not move in a direction of violence, of crime, of drugs and alcohol, um, where I would have been in jail or dead. Those were my options as a youth. Growing up in Scarborough, growing up in a ghetto, growing up in poverty, growing up with a family with mental health and issues, substance use issues. So I had a choice. I had a choice to go down this road, or I could choose the red road, which was my road. I was like, oh my God, we have a road? That's incredible. It's a beautiful road. And that road I chose to pick up. And now today, I would never imagine that I would have even an ounce of what I have in my life. I'm very, very appreciative. And this, so I know spirituality is real. I know it's strange. It's odd. I'm a part of contrary societies. Uh, it's backwards sometimes. It doesn't make any sense. And then there's times where it makes complete sense. It all unfolds and beautiful, miraculous healing happens. And you're like, wow, that is just incredible, to witness that. Um, and then science would just poo poo it and say, wow, that's just coincidental. You know, show us that you can do it again. You're like, the healers are like, they can't be bothered. They don't want to be a part of that. Don't be negative about it. Let's try to stay positive. Let's try to find ways to talk about this where we can build on it, right? And I believe you're doing the right thing um, as well. I've listened to you. I've witnessed your work about reading your books as well about narrative therapy. How powerful that is. I started to take some of your work and some of your ideas and I started to employ that in my practice. And I seen huge miraculous change in individuals just by helping them change their story, change a little bit of their ideas, helping them refocus and reshift. It's, it, it. So what you said was so fascinating for me by telling me that, if traditional healing happens and whether you call it traditional healing or you call it doctoring or you call it narrative therapy or some other intervention, um, whether it's replicatable or not, whether it's something that what I found and what I've heard and what I know, 60% of the session, if it's a 50-minute session, an hour session, maybe you go longer, maybe you go an hour and a half, 2 hours even. Let's be generous. The Western world wants you to meet for 50 minutes with a client, but when I did my practice, I would meet a little bit longer with a client, or I'd let them, if they were going through something traumatic, I would let them try to move through that and not interrupt that. Yeah, I might have had a patient, another client waiting in the lobby, but I would explain to the other patient too, I'm sorry, we may have to reschedule this, or can you wait a few more minutes? I'm just meeting with this client and we're working through something. Now, 60% of the sessions, huge miraculous change would shift in an individual just because they got a connection. They connected with you. They got to sit with you. They're feeling validated. They're feeling heard. 60% of those sessions were always like that. The client, if they came, and I know you were saying, well, it really helps if they have a belief too. If they were really in a mindset of believing in culture or spirituality, and yeah, that's definitely helpful. But if they have no idea about culture or spirituality, they have no idea of their identity, it's such a beautiful thing to share with them and say, hey, do you want to try something? Do you want to try something that somebody introduced to me and it really worked for me? It really helped me out. There's this medicine I want to introduce to you, and it's called smudge. And it's a sage, and we burn this. And we bring it over ourselves spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and physically. And it really helps me. It really helps to change my mindset, my thinking. It helps me to feel good. And I especially use this when I don't feel well, when I'm sad, when I'm hurting. And they like, oh yeah, I'll try that. Sure, why not? Let's give it a shot. And they do it with you, and then you're like, hey, I want to give you a little kit. Here's a little shell and some sage and some matches. Did you know you could do this at home by yourself? When you're feeling down, you're feeling, you know, that pain and that sorrow, you can smudge anytime you want. You're having a bad dream in the middle of the night, wake up, burn some smudge. Uh, you see huge improvements. The clients are so appreciative that you gave them a little bundle, a little kit. They started the beginning of their journey, right? So I think what you're hitting the nail on the head is dead on about transformation can happen. We can share this information. People can witness how it works. They can see it. So I appreciate the time. I
Yeah,
appreciate you letting me share.
yeah, no, thank you so much. And you made me think about how we do we have hundreds of stories, and every story is valid. And we could probably come up with more stories than they could find subjects for a randomized controlled trial. We probably have more power in stories than they have in their, worship of the mean. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
it would be so hard to try to. I went to a contrary ceremony last weekend, and what happened in those few hours, it would be so difficult for me to explain. Um, I could try, but it would do no justice trying to write it.
right. Oh, it's so true. And, it's interesting too because I do lodge with these guys in the recovery house that we have. And the last time we were in there, one of them looked at me and he said, you know, I gotta talk about all those crazy things that happened in that UEP ceremony. He said, I can't talk to anyone else because you can't tell white people about this stuff. They go nuts.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
I'm like, yeah, it's pretty amazing.
The ceremonial debrief, yeah, like that's huge too. Like even spiritual case management, that's a whole nother trickiness challenge. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah. But it is so true, and I know you probably have somewhere to go. So I'll just say one more thing and then we'll wrap it,
sure.
call it a wrap. But you reminded me, like this week. So I have this client who believes that someone is controlling her thoughts and putting thoughts into her head and things like that. And she's not interested in the conventional psychiatric world at all. And so we found a song for her. She doesn't know any songs, but we found a song for her to play on her smartphone, and it's the Mi'kmaq honoring song.
Mm.
And so when she plays, I found out this week when she played that song, the the thoughts stopped coming into her head, and it was just so cool, you know.
Yeah,
And so we recorded another song for her to play.
that's great. There you go. See how it starts?
That's how it starts.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. So, but anyway, I know you have places to go,
sure.
and we,
I appreciate
my,
it.
my wife envies you. She misses Toronto.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I think she used to live at Bloor and Spadina.
Oh, there you go. Okay, yeah,
It
yeah.
says Spadina.
Made a Canadian Center there.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, U of T.
yeah, yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, and
Thanks, Lewis.
let let's talk again sometime in the future because
Sure,
we'll both be a little smarter
sure, definitely.
as time goes on.
Thanks, Lewis. Thanks so
All
much.
right. Well, thank you for joining me,
Okay, take
and
care.
say hi to Rennie.
I will. Thanks.
Okay. All right.
Bye.
Take care.